Bismarck, Dakota Territory. November 3, 1883. Margaret O'Sullivan was building something that made no sense to anyone watching. The Irish widow, 31 with 3 children under 9, was constructing what looked like an enormous clay beehive in her cabin corner. Not a proper cast-iron stove, not a stone fireplace like the Germans built. A massive dome of mud and clay 5 feet high, nearly 4 feet across, taking up a quarter of her cramped living space. Samuel Hendricks, the settlement's most experienced homesteader with 12 Dakota winters behind him, watched and shook his head. "Margaret, that mud pile's going to crack apart first cold snap. You're wasting time you don't have." Johann Weber, a German immigrant with proper metalworking knowledge from Prussia, was more direct. "This is foolishness. Cast iron conducts heat. Your clay? It's an insulator. You'll burn twice the wood for half the warmth." Even Father Michael Collins expressed concern. "Mrs. O'Sullivan, I've seen traditional fireplaces fail in Dakota winters. What you're building, I don't understand how it could work better." Margaret didn't argue. She'd learned arguing with men about building was pointless. She just kept mixing clay and sand and dried grass, forming thick coils, building her absurd stove layer by patient layer. What did this desperate widow understand about thermal dynamics that 3 experienced men, a 12-year veteran homesteader, a trained metal worker, and an educated priest, had completely missed? Before we reveal what Margaret knew that saved her children's lives, hit that like button, subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. The stove Margaret constructed defied every principle her neighbors thought they understood about heating. The walls measured 18 inches thick at the base, tapering to 12 inches at the dome top. She built it with 3 distinct layers. The innermost layer, 6 inches thick, consisted of pure clay mixed with sand in a 3-to-1 ratio. The middle layer, 8 inches thick, contained clay mixed with dried prairie grass, creating air pockets throughout. The outer layer, 4 inches thick, returned to dense clay and sand. The firebox opening measured just 14 inches wide and 10 inches tall. The flue didn't go straight up. Instead, Margaret built a serpentine channel forcing hot gases through 43 feet of clay passages before exiting. Samuel Hendricks didn't hide his disapproval. "Margaret, that firebox is too damn small. You'll never fit enough wood, and all those twists in the flue, smoke's gonna back up." Johann Weber was technical in his criticism. The specific heat capacity of iron is 0.11 BTU per pound per degree. It heats fast, radiates immediately. Your clay, it'll take hours to warm up. Your children will freeze waiting. Catherine Morrison tried a gentler approach. "Margaret, dear, I understand you're trying to save money, but I'm worried about those babies." Margaret thanked her and kept working. She completed the stove over 17 days, letting it dry for 12 days before the first fire. Even people who wanted to support her thought she was making a terrible mistake. Thomas Mackenzie put it plainly, "That woman's pride is going to kill those kids." What Margaret understood, and what her critics had never considered, was the fundamental difference between convective heat and radiant thermal mass. It wasn't just a different approach, it was a completely different physics paradigm operating in her favor. Cast iron stoves work through convection and immediate radiation. You build a hot fire, the metal heats within minutes, heat radiates into the room. It feels wonderful. You can warm your hands directly on the surface, stand 3 feet away, and you'll feel intense warmth. The immediate gratification is seductive, making cast iron seem superior. The problem reveals itself when you stop feeding the fire. Iron has low thermal mass, heats quickly, and cools just as quickly. Stop adding wood, and within 40 minutes the stove is cool. In Dakota winters hitting 20 below regularly, this means feeding fire constantly, burning through wood at alarming rates, experiencing wild temperature swings, warm when fire's roaring, freezing when it dies, endless labor feeding flames. Samuel Hendricks calculated he added wood every 90 minutes during severe cold, 16 times per day. At night, he'd wake at 2-hour intervals or let the fire die and wake to a frigid cabin. Johann Weber's cast iron stove heated air near it to 80 degrees while the far corner lingered at 45. The temperature gradient was severe and uncomfortable. His wife Anna constantly moved their children closer or farther, trying to balance too hot and too cold. Margaret's clay stove operated on entirely different principles she'd learned from her grandmother in County Cork, who'd learned them from her grandmother, stretching back through generations of Irish rural poor who couldn't afford constant fuel. Clay has high thermal mass and low thermal conductivity. This combination creates something remarkable that requires understanding both properties. Thermal mass refers to a material's ability to absorb and store heat energy. It's calculated by multiplying specific heat capacity times mass. Clay's specific heat capacity is 0.22 BTU per pound per degree Fahrenheit. That might not sound impressive until you multiply it by the mass. The 18-inch walls of Margaret's stove absorbed heat slowly over hours. The inner 6-inch layer of dense clay reached temperatures exceeding 300 degrees during a sustained burn. The middle 8-inch layer with its air pockets acted as both storage mass and insulation, reaching temperatures around 200 degrees. The outer 4-inch layer rarely exceeded 150 degrees, even during peak firing. But here's the crucial element. Those 8,000 pounds of clay and sand held that heat for 12 to 16 hours after the fire died. The math tells the story. 8,000 pounds of clay with specific heat capacity of 0.22 BTU per pound per degree, heated 100 degrees above ambient temperature, stores 176,000 BTUs. Johann Weber's 300-pound cast iron stove with specific heat capacity of 0.11 BTU per pound per degree, heated 100 degrees above ambient, stores just 3,300 BTUs. Margaret's stove held 53 times more thermal energy. But storage is only half the equation. Release rate matters just as much. This is where thermal conductivity becomes critical. Iron has high thermal conductivity, 46 BTU inches per hour per square foot per degree. It dumps heat quickly. Clay has low thermal conductivity, just 5 BTU inches per hour per square foot per degree. It releases slowly and steadily. Margaret's stove was essentially a massive battery. Charge it with a hot fire for 3 to 4 hours, it discharged over 12 to 16 hours. The surface never got dangerously hot, but remained warm 15 hours after the last ember died. The heat radiated gently and evenly. Because the mass was large and distributed, the entire cabin warmed uniformly rather than creating severe gradients. Margaret would build one fire evening around 5, feeding it until 9. By 9 o'clock, when she let it die, the thermal battery was charged. It radiated all night. By morning, the cabin had only cooled 4 or 5 degrees. She'd build a smaller morning fire around 7, burning an hour or two. 2 cycles per day, roughly 10 to 12 hours burning, maintaining comfortable temperatures 24 hours. The serpentine flue was central to efficiency. In conventional straight flue stoves, hot gases escape directly. Most heat is wasted. Margaret's 43-foot flue path captured that heat. Johann Weber later measured exhaust gases. Margaret's flue exited at 180 degrees Fahrenheit. His cast iron stove exhausted at 420 degrees. Margaret captured 140 additional BTUs per cubic foot of exhaust. Over a typical 3-hour burn, that meant thousands of captured BTUs. The construction details mattered. Margaret's 3-to-1 clay-to-sand ratio created dense, durable surface withstanding direct flame without cracking. Pure clay cracks from thermal expansion. Too much sand weakens structure. The ratio was critical. The middle layer's air pockets reduced thermal conductivity while adding thermal mass without proportional weight. Dried prairie grass created tiny air spaces absorbing and releasing heat slowly. This was Margaret's innovation on her grandmother's Irish design. Dakota winters required better insulation. Margaret's approach had parallels in systems her critics never encountered. Korean ondol heated thick stone floors from below. Russian brick stoves, sometimes 15,000 pounds, operated identically. Finnish contraflow heaters, Scandinavian masonry heaters, German Grundofen. Every cold climate culture independently developed thermal mass heating because the physics advantages were undeniable. Pueblo peoples used adobe walls 2 feet thick, stabilizing interior temperatures. Margaret hadn't studied these. She simply remembered her grandmother in Cork running her hand along a clay hearth still warm from the previous evening. "Rock, don't forget the heat, Maggie," Metals like a man with no memory. Hot then cold, never holding nothing, but stone, clay, proper earth, that remembers. You feed metal all night or you freeze. You feed earth once, it feeds you back all night long. Margaret's critics weren't stupid. They were wrong, but their reasoning made sense. Cast iron did heat faster, feel hotter. In mild weather, it was superior. With unlimited wood, more convenient. But Margaret didn't have unlimited wood. She was a widow with 3 children on 40 marginal acres. She needed maximum efficiency from minimum fuel, heat lasting through the night, something safe for her 7-year-old to touch. The math proved Margaret's advantage. Clay at 0.22 BTU per pound per degree, double iron's capacity. 8,000 pounds storing 176,000 BTUs versus Johann's 300 pounds storing 3,300. 53 times more thermal energy. Johann burned 4 cords per winter. Margaret would burn 1.5. Johann's cabin swung 40 degrees between peak fire and morning. Margaret's varied less than 12. Johann woke every 2 hours to feed his stove. Margaret slept through. December 23, 1883. A weather system meteorologists would later classify as a borderline blizzard moved south from Canada into Dakota Territory. Temperature dropped from 18 degrees at noon to 6 below by nightfall. Wind gusts exceeded 40 miles per hour. Snow fell heavily, cutting visibility to under 50 feet. Serious weather, but not unprecedented. Experienced homesteaders knew the drill. Stock up firewood within reach. Keep the stove burning hot. Weather the storm. What they didn't anticipate was duration. The blizzard didn't pass in a day or two. It intensified. By December 24th, Christmas Eve, 14 below. By Christmas morning, 20 below. Wind howled continuously at 30 to 40 miles per hour with gusts exceeding 50. This wasn't just uncomfortable cold. This was life-threatening cold, finding every crack, sucking heat from wood structures faster than cast iron stoves could replace it, turning simple tasks into survival challenges. By December 26th, 23 below. December 27th, 28 below. December 28th, Samuel Hendrix's thermometer recorded 31 below. The wind never stopped. Snowdrifts buried entire walls. Thomas Mackenzie's western wall disappeared under a drift reaching the roofline. Simply retrieving firewood from a shed 15 feet away became genuinely dangerous. The cold was aggressive, hostile, actively trying to kill you. Johann Weber's 10-year-old son, Friedrich, attempted to bring in more wood on the morning of December 27th. The temperature was 28 below, with wind chill approaching 50 below. Friedrich wrapped himself in everything they had. 2 wool coats, his father's scarf, his mother's shawl over his head. He made it halfway to the shed, approximately 8 feet from the cabin door, when a wind gust hit him directly. The force knocked him down. He tried to stand, but the wind kept him down. He crawled back toward the cabin, disoriented in the blowing snow. His hands, inadequately protected, were on the frozen ground for perhaps 90 seconds. His ears, exposed when the shawl blew aside, were in direct wind for less than 2 minutes. He crawled back to the cabin with frostbite on 3 fingers of his right hand, 2 fingers of his left hand, and both ears. The tips had gone white, then gray. Anna Weber knew immediately how serious it was. Johann kept his cast-iron stove burning as hot as he dared, but the cabin wouldn't stay warm. He fed it wood constantly, every hour, every 45 minutes when the cold was worst. The metal radiated heat beautifully near the stove. Stand 2 feet away and you'd feel intense warmth on your face and chest. But 3 feet away, the temperature plummeted. 4 feet away, it was barely tolerable. The corners of the cabin hovered in the low 40s. The temperature gradient was brutal and dangerous. Friedrich, still recovering from his frostbite, couldn't stay close to the stove without pain from the thawing. But away from the stove, he shivered uncontrollably. Anna moved him constantly, trying to find the impossible balance. That night, December 27th, Friedrich developed a cough. By morning on December 28th, the cough was deeper, producing thick phlegm. By evening of December 28th, he was coughing every 2 or 3 minutes. By December 29th, the cough had become pneumonia. His fever spiked to 103 degrees. In a warm, stable environment, pneumonia is survivable with proper care. In a cabin that swung from 80 degrees near the stove to 45 in the corners, with a sick child who couldn't tolerate being right by the heat source, it was life-threatening. Samuel Hendricks faced a different crisis. His cabin was larger, 16 by 20 feet, compared to most settlers' 12 by 16 structures. He'd built big because he had ambitions, because he wanted space for a future family. More space meant more volume to heat. 320 cubic feet versus 192 cubic feet, nearly 70% more volume. His cast iron stove, perfectly adequate in normal cold, couldn't keep up with 30 below temperatures and relentless wind infiltration. He burned through his accessible indoor wood supply by December 27th. He'd kept perhaps 3 days' worth inside, thinking that was plenty. It wasn't. The extreme cold meant he was burning 50% more wood than normal. By morning of December 28th, he had to make trips to his outdoor wood pile. The pile was 15 feet from his cabin door, beyond a small shed. In normal weather, a trivial distance. In this blizzard, with 30 below temperatures and 50-mile-per-hour wind gusts, every trip was a calculated risk. The first trip went fine. The second trip, he slipped on ice hidden under snow. No injury, just a scare. The third trip, returning with an armload of wood, his foot caught on something beneath the snow, a small stump he'd never properly removed. He fell hard, his left leg twisting beneath him. He felt something tear in his knee. The pain was immediate and severe. He crawled the remaining 8 feet to his door, dragging the firewood, his knee screaming. Inside, he tried to stand. The knee wouldn't bear weight. He'd torn something, ligaments, cartilage, he didn't know. He knew he couldn't make another wood trip. He had perhaps 10 hours of fuel remaining. After that, his cabin would begin freezing. A man alone with a damaged knee in a cabin losing heat in 30 below weather was in genuine danger. Catherine Morrison's situation was worst of all. Her husband had died the previous February, leaving her with their 6-year-old daughter Emma and a quarter-section claim she couldn't abandon without losing everything. She'd prepared for winter as best she could, cutting and splitting wood through summer and fall. She thought she'd calculated correctly. She'd been burning wood aggressively since December 23rd, keeping her cast iron stove hot because Emma seemed especially vulnerable to cold. By December 28th, she realized with creeping horror that she'd badly miscalculated her supply. She'd used half her winter fuel in 5 days. She had perhaps 6 days of fuel remaining at current consumption rates. The blizzard showed no signs of breaking. Weather this severe could last 2 weeks. Simple arithmetic spelled disaster. She tried cutting her burn rate, letting the cabin temperature drop to conserve fuel. By December 29th, her cabin temperature was 38 degrees. Emma had stopped playing. She just sat wrapped in every blanket they owned, shivering continuously. Catherine held her, trying to share body heat, terrified. If they ran out of fuel before the blizzard broke, they'd freeze. Father Collins, checking on families after the storm, would later record what Catherine told him. I sat there holding Emma, watching that wood pile get smaller, doing the math over and over, hoping it would come out different. It never did. I knew if the storm lasted 2 more days past my fuel, we'd die. That's not exaggeration. That's arithmetic. 20 below outside, no fuel, a 6-year-old child. We'd last maybe 12 hours before hypothermia set in. Thomas Mackenzie, the settlement's unofficial mayor, fared better with a well-built cabin and ample wood, but even his cast-iron stove couldn't maintain comfort. His temperature journal showed 2 feet from stove, 76 degrees. Corner, 43 degrees. Cast-iron heating created zones, not even warmth. Andrew Sullivan's cabin showed 42-degree swings over 24 hours, 68 degrees at 4 p.m. after heavy firing, 26 degrees by 6 a.m. His water bucket froze solid overnight inside his cabin. His family slept in all their clothes. The children cried from cold. Margaret O'Sullivan's cabin, by contrast, was comfortable. Not warm by summer standards, but consistently maintained between 62 and 64 degrees throughout the entire storm. Not just near the stove, everywhere. The corner farthest from the stove measured 60 degrees. The area near the door, where cold air infiltrated despite her best efforts, stayed at 59 degrees. The uniformity was remarkable. Her massive clay stove, heated for 4 hours each evening, radiated gentle warmth through the night and well into the following day. She built her evening fire around 5 o'clock, feeding it steadily with moderate-sized pieces of split oak and ash. By 9 o'clock, she let it die down to coals, then let those coals burn out completely. The surface of the stove at 9 o'clock registered approximately 140 degrees Fahrenheit. Not hot enough to burn, but quite warm. By midnight, the surface was 110 degrees. By 4 in the morning, 95 degrees. By 8 in the morning when she woke, 82 degrees. Still radiating perceptible heat 12 hours after the last flame. She'd build a smaller fire around 7:30 in the morning, burning for 90 minutes to 2 hours, bringing the clay temperature back up. Then she'd let it coast through the day on stored heat. 2 burn cycles totaling perhaps 6 hours of actual flames per day. Compare that to Johann Weber feeding his cast iron stove 16 times per day, maintaining flames essentially continuously. Her children, 7-year-old Bridget, 5-year-old Sean, and 2-year-old Nora, played on the floor near the stove without bundling in multiple layers. They wore normal indoor clothing, 1 layer, comfortable. Bridget read by oil lamp in the corner. Sean built block structures. Nora, the 2-year-old, toddled around freely. No one was shivering. No one huddled under blankets. The contrast with every other cabin in the settlement was stark. Margaret used less than half a cord of wood during the 10-day blizzard. Johann Weber used nearly a full cord. Samuel Hendricks used 0.8 cords. Catherine Morrison exhausted her supply entirely. Margaret's efficiency advantage wasn't theoretical. It was empirical, measurable, and in this crisis, life-saving. Every evening, before banking her fire, Margaret checked on her children. Bridget slept soundly in her small bed. Sean and Nora shared a larger bed, both comfortable under a single quilt. The cabin temperature at midnight was 63 degrees, comfortable sleeping temperature. In Johann Weber's cabin at midnight, Friedrich shivered under 4 blankets while his parents tried to keep the stove burning hot enough. The temperature swung from 75 near the stove to 42 in the sleeping area. No one slept well. In Samuel Hendricks's cabin, he lay awake worrying about fuel and his injured knee, the temperature fluctuating wildly as the fire burned hot then died down. In Catherine Morrison's cabin, Emma slept fitfully, too cold to rest properly despite every blanket they owned. If you're finding this valuable, hit that like button and comment below telling me what other historical survival techniques you'd like me to investigate. Now let's talk about what happened when Margaret's neighbors realized she'd been right all along. December 30th, 1883, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Samuel Hendricks knocked on Margaret's door. He'd hobbled through the storm on his injured knee, using a makeshift crutch driven by desperation. She opened the door to find him standing in driving snow, his face raw from cold despite being wrapped in a scarf, his posture showing obvious pain from his damaged knee. "Margaret," he said, his voice hoarse from cold and exhaustion. "Johann Weber's boy has pneumonia. He's bad, real bad. Anna's terrified. Their cabin can't stay warm enough. The temperature swings are making it worse. Can we bring him here?" Margaret didn't hesitate. She'd heard what Samuel said, understood what he was asking, recognized what it cost him to ask. This was the man who'd called her foolish 2 months ago. She pulled the door wider. "Bring him. Bring the whole family if the cabin's that cold. There's room." Samuel nodded, relief visible despite the pain in his face. "I'll tell them. Margaret, I was wrong about your stove. I said it wouldn't work. I said you were wasting time and materials. I was wrong." She touched his arm briefly. "Get Friedrich here. That's what matters now. Everything else can wait." Within an hour, through blinding snow and brutal wind, Johann and Anna carried Friedrich. Anna held him wrapped in blankets, Johann breaking trail ahead of her. The journey was perhaps 200 feet, but took nearly 15 minutes. They arrived at Margaret's door exhausted and frightened. Margaret pulled them inside immediately. The moment they crossed the threshold, everything changed. The warmth was immediately, dramatically apparent. Not stove-side warmth where you're hot on one side and cold on the other. The entire space was evenly heated. The air itself was warm. Anna gasped, audibly, involuntarily. She looked around the cabin, taking in the temperature, seeing Margaret's children playing comfortably in regular clothes, feeling the warmth on her face and hands. She looked at the massive clay structure in the corner, her expression shifting from confusion to dawning understanding. How is it this warm? Her voice carried amazement and something like grief, recognition of what they'd needed and dismissed. Margaret was already preparing a pallet near the stove for Friedrich, moving quickly and efficiently. The clay holds the heat. I built one fire last night around 5, burned it until 9. Built another this morning at 7, burned maybe 90 minutes. That's all. The mass holds it and gives it back slow. She gestured to the stove. 8,000 pounds of clay. It remembers. Johann, who'd called her foolish, who'd explained confidently that cast iron was superior, said nothing. He helped Anna settle Friedrich on the pallet near the stove. The boy was burning with fever but shaking with chills, his body unable to regulate temperature properly. Johann stood there looking at his son, looking at the stove, doing the mental calculations he should have done 2 months earlier. Finally, he put his hand on the clay surface. It was warm, not hot enough to burn. You could leave your palm there indefinitely, but definitely warm. Radiating steady, gentle heat. He left his palm there for a long moment, feeling heat that had been stored hours ago now releasing slowly. I was wrong, he said finally, his voice quiet but clear. This works. This works better. The confession cost him something. Johann was proud of his metalworking knowledge, proud of his technical understanding. Admitting fundamental error about heat physics in front of his wife, his son, and the widow he'd criticized required real humility. Margaret could see it in his face, the difficulty, the sincerity, the fear for his son overriding his pride. She touched his shoulder gently. It's old knowledge. My grandmother's grandmother knew it. Her grandmother probably knew it. That doesn't make anyone stupid for not knowing. You knew what you'd been taught. Now you know something different. She paused, then added, and Johann, your son is going to be fine. This cabin stays steady temperature. No swings. That's what he needs now. Stable warmth, no stress from temperature changes. He'll recover here. The relief on Johann and Anna's faces was visible. Over the next 2 days, as the blizzard continued, word spread through the settlement. Margaret's cabin was warm. Actually consistently warm. Not just near the stove, everywhere. And she was barely using wood. And Johann Weber's son was recovering there. Samuel Hendricks came by December 31st, ostensibly to check on Friedrich, but really to see the stove. He brought his thermometer, a good mercury instrument from Chicago. He wanted empirical data, not impressions. Margaret welcomed him and gave permission to measure anything. Samuel took readings methodically. Near the stove surface, 65 degrees. 6 feet from stove, 63 degrees. Far corner, 60 degrees. Near the door, 59 degrees. He wrote each measurement in his notebook. Then he looked at Margaret. My cabin this morning with my stove burning hot was 41 degrees. That's 22 degrees difference. And you're burning maybe a third the wood. The uniformity baffled him. How is the whole cabin this warm? The heat's everywhere. Margaret explained thermal mass as best she understood it. The clay heats slow, but it heats all through. 8,000 pounds. All those walls, 18 inches thick, all holding heat deep inside. Then it gives back slow and steady in all directions. Not fast like iron, slow and even. The heat spreads into the whole room. Samuel wrote specifications. Wall thickness, 3 layers, firing schedule. He asked permission. Margaret gave it. Anyone who wants to know, I'll tell them. No secrets. We're all trying to survive. Andrew Sullivan came by on January 1st, bringing his own thermometer to verify Samuel's measurements. He'd heard the reports and didn't fully believe them. He measured 59 degrees in the corner farthest from Margaret's stove, 63 degrees in the center. Then he went home and measured his own cabin. 37 degrees in the corner, 44 degrees center, 68 degrees right next to his stove. The data was undeniable. Thomas Mackenzie, the settlement's informal mayor, visited that same day. He'd been skeptical of Margaret's design from the start, though he'd been too polite to say so directly. He'd thought it was desperation and foolishness. Now he stood in her cabin, feeling the even warmth, seeing Friedrich Weber recovering comfortably, watching Margaret's children play in light clothing, while his own children at home were bundled in multiple layers. He looked at the clay stove for a long time. "Margaret, I owe you an apology. I thought this was a mistake. I was wrong. This is remarkable." He paused, then added, "How many families do you think could build something like this by next winter?" Catherine Morrison arrived on January 1st as well, her daughter Emma bundled in every piece of clothing they owned. Catherine's voice shook when she spoke. "Margaret, I've got 2 days of wood left. Maybe less. I don't know what to do. If the storm doesn't break." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. Margaret took them in without hesitation. "Stay here until the weather breaks. We'll manage." Catherine and Emma stayed 3 days. Emma, who'd been shivering constantly in their own cabin, was comfortable within an hour. The stable temperature, the even warmth, the simple relief from cold stress, it was visible in the child's face. On January 2nd, Father Michael Collins made rounds checking on families. He came to Margaret's cabin and found 7 people there. Margaret and her 3 children, Johan's family of 3, Catherine and Emma, all comfortable in a space designed for 4. The cabin was 64 degrees despite the door being opened multiple times. He looked at Margaret with new understanding. "I criticized your stove, Margaret. I thought it wouldn't work. I was wrong, and I apologize." Margaret was gracious. "Father, you were concerned for my children. That's never wrong. You didn't know about thermal mass. Now you do." The blizzard broke on January 3rd, 1884. The temperature rose to 4 below zero. The wind died. Friedrich Weber was recovering, his fever broken. Samuel's knee was healing. Catherine and Emma had survived. In a community meeting on January 5th, the topic dominated discussion. Samuel spoke first. "I've got measurements. Margaret's cabin maintained 62 to 64 degrees. Mine averaged 42. She used 1/3 the wood I burned." Johann was direct. "I'm a metal worker. I should have calculated the thermal mass advantage. I didn't. Margaret did. I was wrong." Father Collins added, "This isn't just one storm. Margaret's approach is sustainably more efficient. Less wood, less labor, less danger." Margaret spent 3 Sundays explaining her construction process. She drew diagrams, specified measurements, described the clay-to-sand ratio, the air pocket layer, the serpentine flue. She emphasized 12 days minimum curing time. She was generous with information. "My grandmother taught me this because people needed to know it. I'm teaching you for the same reason." 17 families requested specifications. Margaret wrote them out by hand. By end of January, 8 families had begun construction. By spring, 23 had built or were building them. Designs varied. Johann Weber added a copper water reservoir using waste heat for hot water. The data over following winters confirmed Margaret's advantages. Families with thermal mass stoves reported 40 to 60% reductions in wood consumption. The Morrison family reported temperature stability within 8 degrees variation over 24 hours, compared to previous 40-degree swings. The economic impact was significant. A 40% reduction in wood meant 40% less labor. Samuel Hendricks calculated his thermal mass stove saved approximately 160 hours per winter. At 15 cents per hour valuation, that was $24, nearly a month's wages. Health implications mattered equally. Even temperatures meant fewer respiratory illnesses. Pneumonia decreased noticeably in homes with thermal mass heating. Doctors couldn't prove causation, but the correlation was clear. Friedrich Weber remained healthy through subsequent winters. His parents attributed this to stable temperatures. Johann Weber became a strong advocate, writing to newspapers describing efficiency gains and lobbying the territorial government to include thermal mass designs in homesteader guidance. By 1887, an estimated 140 families across Dakota Territory had built thermal mass stoves based on Margaret's design or variations. The knowledge spread through Norwegian, German, and Irish communities, each adding refinements. Margaret O'Sullivan died March 17, 1921, at 68. She'd lived 38 years beyond that desperate winter. Her original stove still stood, still heating efficiently. Her daughter Bridget maintained it 17 more years. The structure came down in 1938, 55 years after construction, with clay walls still intact. Modern building science has validated Margaret's understanding. Thermal mass heating is recognized as highly efficient for climates with large temperature swings. Oak Ridge National Laboratory research confirmed high-mass systems reduce energy consumption 40 to 70% in appropriate climates. The capacity figures Margaret never calculated, clay at 0.22, iron at 0.11, explain exactly why her design worked. Masonry heaters based on similar principles are experiencing renaissance in sustainable building. Manufacturers sell modern versions incorporating Margaret's concepts: massive thermal storage, serpentine flue paths, slow release. They're marketed as innovations, but are actually revivals of traditional knowledge nearly lost. If Margaret had listened to critics, if she'd built conventional stoves, the knowledge might have died with her grandmother's generation. Families might have suffered needlessly. Traditional knowledge, developed through generations, often contains sophisticated solutions. Dismissing it as primitive is dangerous arrogance. Margaret's critics weren't malicious. They were experienced, intelligent men making reasonable assessments. But their understanding was incomplete. They'd never considered thermal mass dynamics, never wondered if efficiency mattered more than intensity, never imagined a widow might know something they didn't. The implications run deeper. We fetishize novelty and dismiss tradition, assuming newer is better, progress is linear, ancient techniques are inferior. Margaret's story suggests otherwise. Her stove wasn't primitive, it was sophisticated, accumulated wisdom refined over generations. It solved providing warmth through extreme cold with limited fuel more effectively than advanced cast iron technology. How much other knowledge are we losing? How many traditional techniques, dismissed as backward, contain profound understanding? Margaret wasn't making statements. She was keeping her children alive. But her willingness to trust traditional knowledge over contemporary dismissal, her persistence building something everyone called foolish, saved lives. Her generosity sharing that knowledge saved more. Her legacy extends beyond heating. It's a lesson in humility. Wisdom doesn't only flow from credentials and formal education. Sometimes it flows from a grandmother in Cork who understood rock remembers heat. Sometimes the person everyone dismisses as desperate and foolish sees most clearly. Give this video a like, hit subscribe, and drop a comment telling me what other historical building techniques you want me to investigate. Next time, we're diving into the Norwegian immigrant who built underground grain storage that stayed 30 degrees cooler than every other settler's approach during the brutal summer of 1889. The establishment said it would flood and rot. The establishment was wrong. I'll see you there.